In the spirit of thinking about, how you might use it, how it works within your specific context, whether that's your students or your course topic specifically, we wanted to make sure that we shared a few examples of how the instructors we've been working with have used Papyrus AI so far in their courses. I might reference some other examples that aren't explicitly on these slides. I might reference some student responses as well, but we wanted to also show some of these assignments that we've been able to get the permission to share with y'all in case it's helpful as you are brainstorming for your own courses and how you might bring in Papyrus AI itself. So this first example, one thing I want to highlight too with each of these is how these activities were created by the instructors in light of what they're seeing in the classroom. So what are the things they're trying to convey? What are the things they're trying to get their students to understand, those student learning objectives? And then how can AI actually fill in gaps or support the other instruction they're already doing to help accomplish these student learning objectives more effectively. So this first example is an activity that's a debate activity, which this instructor was bringing in initially to help facilitate student group discussions, particularly on a specific debate topic. So just to give you a little context, as I know there's a lot of text on the screen, this activity, the instructions were that students should first work individually, as it says here on the top left, where they should spend 15 minutes arguing with Papyrus AI, which has been prompted to act as a mock debate opponent, using their assigned agree or disagree statements. So students were put into groups, they were assigned a question, and then they were assigned a specific side on that question, such as this agree or disagree side here on the screen. So they would spend some time working on alone first and arguing with the AI, coming up with their own arguments, along with trying to find evidence for these things. And then after they have that individual thinking time, they then go together with their team and they spend some more time selecting the best arguments. So making evaluations as to what's the most effective for their science side, coming up with evidence, and then finally coming together as a class to present, and then everybody voting and talking about those results. So a few things I just want to highlight about this activity. So first of all, this activity was designed initially to help facilitate group interaction. So the AI is being used here to help students think more and think more effectively given the time constraints of an in-class activity. I think when I've sat in on this activity multiple times over the past year, I believe this activity took maybe an hour or so, maybe a little over. And as you are all, as you all know, I'm sure that might not be a lot of time for students to really think through these arguments and come up with evidence and talk with their teams and present. And so one of the things the instructor noted when he was implementing this in his class was that he felt that the students were able to think, like use their thinking time more effectively because they had this debate partner of Papyrus AI to argue against and to really crystallize those thoughts. When I walked around, when I'm looking at what students are doing with this activity, one thing that really struck me was that the students are really treating this conversation with Papyrus AI with a lot of care, where I saw them sitting there thinking, slowly typing up paragraphs to send to the AI in response to its arguments. And so it was initially was to stimulate that critical thinking, stimulate these group conversations then that follow the individual thinking time. One thing that this was kind of transformed into, which I thought was really cool, was that the instructor noticed that students were sort of playing with the AI and trying to get it to concede to them and try to make the AI lose or try to win over the AI in the argument. And that brought into the conversation like a really interesting piece of also, how can students prompt it? How can students interact with it? And also understanding, the AI, when you tell it that it's wrong enough times, it'll eventually say, yeah, I'm wrong, right? Sorry, you're right, right? And I'm sure many of you have had this experience. And so it brought in this really cool additional AI literacy piece of understanding the limitations of AI in that sense. So just a few things I wanted to highlight about that. That first, that arose from, we have a short, limited time in class. How can I make this more effective? Let's bring in AI to stimulate that thinking, and then building in the AI literacy component pretty naturally from what he was doing in the class. And also trying this activity multiple times through multiple quarters, iterating on it, and then really, refining it as we go on. This second example that I want to share, and Tamara, if there's anything you want to add, anybody feel free to jump in. But the second activity I want to share is a case study example where the instructor, just to give you context for what this assignment was doing, wanted to give the students dedicated time in class to think about ethics and engineering and to have a discussion with their group, look at these case studies, answer some questions related to ethics, and then share out with the rest of the class. His concern, this gap that he identified in his pre-existing activities, was that students were not coming into class having read the assigned materials, which is a common concern across many classrooms. And so one of the things he really wanted to try to use AI for, to leverage in the classroom, was to have the AI summarize the text and have the students use that summary and put their time in class more toward thinking through the ethical concerns as opposed to reading this text that they probably wouldn't have read before they came to class. And so he created this assignment, this activity, where you can see that with the case study, they were put into groups. Groups are assigned specific case studies. Then they were asked to first provide a synopsis of the ethics case study to set clear context for their audience that they'd be sharing out to, identify the ethical issues involved, characterize those ethical issues, identify the applicable code of ethics related to the case study, state the conclusions, and ultimately evaluate the appropriateness and applicability of the AI's rationale. So a lot of pieces here, right? But you can see there's a focus on understanding the ethical issues involved and aligning it with the lecture material and the content being conveyed in the course. And then at the end, also again, an AI literacy piece of understanding, the AI gave us the summary. How good was it? How did it evaluate? And how can I trust that output? And what I found as we were doing these activities in class, as I was walking around, because again, I had the privilege of being able to witness this in person, was that students were actually using the summary. They were trying to answer these questions, and I overheard some of them just saying, I don't feel like we have the information that we need. Let's go back to the original thing that it was summarizing. And I think that was a really cool thing, just because, as I'm sure you all have experience with, in the classroom, sometimes students just don't go back to the original reading. They don't go back to the original source. Sometimes they just try to answer the questions and they're just like, well, I have it or I don't, right? And something that the AI was able to provoke, I guess, in the students that was a little unexpected was to get the students to realize, one, the summary was not enough to do the assignment and activity properly. We need to go back to that original source to be able to evaluate it better. And that built it a lot into that AI literacy component, that they're able to identify on their own, not just us telling them, but on their own, that this was not enough, that the output that the AI had generated was not sufficient. But at the same time, it was also helpful in expediting that process of getting there and of getting to the discussion about ethics, because they had a summary that was a little shorter, they could read through it, and then they were still able then to direct what they looked at in the original reading and save some time that way. So again, facilitating these discussions in class between groups and also getting them just straight to the main learning objective of this activity, which was to focus on those ethics as opposed to, hey, read this whole text that might take you 20 minutes or something. And all the time with activities spent on something they should have done outside of class. So something that was motivated by a recognition of the real teaching constraints in the classroom, of just there's not enough time in the world, of students not coming in having read, and then being able to use AI in this way to get students to actually get to the main part of the activity, and they still go back to the original reading. So another cool activity there. And one thing I also want to say as we go into the next activity, these are both by the same instructor, was that this instructor, he focused a lot on scaffolding throughout his course, where this case study activity featured in the first half of the course, and then the second activity featured in the second half, where this activity, it's an elevator pitch activity. So he assigns the students to prepare an elevator speech of who am I, kind of a job interview elevator pitch type thing, 30 seconds to a minute long. And he asked them to prepare this and to present in front of the class. And one thing he wanted to do with this, and this is at the end of the quarter, was that he wanted the students to get some experience with professional presentations, and he wanted them to do it quickly and also get feedback during the class. However, there's a lot of students in the class. It might be hard to provide verbal feedback in enough time. And something he wanted to also share was how you can get feedback like this on your own time. Let me show you that in class. So he created this activity where he had the students prepare that elevator pitch, and he had an AI prompt that he had created that would give these students feedback on their elevator pitch after listening to it or using our speech to text feature, and then giving that feedback in real time and having it play out to the class. And so you can see an example of one of the feedback that the students got here. And again, this was after a student had presented in real time in the classroom Papyrus's speech to texting, we fed it in with the feedback prompt, and then it spat out this feedback. And I wanted to highlight this because I think it's an interesting case of where this instructor had an idea for this activity. He identified a need for this, where the students, he can give them support in the future, learn how to use AI to get feedback like this on their own time. But he also identified that it didn't go so well. And I want to I want to explain a little bit about that and then how he refined that for future quarters. So in this feedback, you can see it focuses on a few different criteria that the professor had told the AI to focus on. So one was word count, and this was an attempt to get the elevator pitch down to a certain length of time. So an estimate of how many words correlates to 30 to 60 seconds of time. So word count, he also recognized a lot of students may not say the full name of their school, so they might just say UCI instead of University of California, Irvine. Experience description of how they can add value to the company and their future career goals. So specific criteria. When we tried this out in class, one of the things that a lot of the students noted was they felt that the feedback wasn't specific enough and that it focused on things that weren't as important to them in terms of feedback they would have wanted to receive. For example, this word count, this full name of school, and also the professor was having the feedback spoken aloud using the audio features in Papyrus. And so they felt the feedback wasn't super effective. The professor felt like it wasn't super effective and that the AI output like was a way to get it better. And so one of the things he did in tailoring it for future classes was that he had, first of all, he adjusted the prompt so that the feedback provided was just narrowed down onto more specific criteria, giving it more room to focus on those criteria as opposed to needing to talk about a lot of different things. And he also had the students read through the feedback on their own and then share what they felt about it. And so that way he was able to bring it into the classroom in a way that was more effective given the time constraints in the class, while also still giving students more effective feedback. So I just wanted to share that as an example of that iterative process by which our instructors that we've been working with, and many of you I'm sure have had experience with, that you have to tweak and tweak these assignments over time, right, to get it working the way that you want it. And so this was an activity that I think showcased that. One more thing that I want to say, just as a general observation of these different activities. So, as I mentioned, for this instructor, this case study example was one activity in the first half of the quarter, and this elevator pitch activity was given in the last 2 weeks, I believe, of the class. And so he scaffolded these activities to try to first introduce students to the capabilities of AI and of prompt engineering, which isn't showcased as much here, but was a big part of other activities that he did. And then by the end of the course, he was really focused on having the students really try to find these use cases that they could apply outside of the classroom. So in this case, thinking about, what is a prompt or what is a way you can use the AI to help you with future directions after you graduate from this class. And so that was an approach that he took. That's not necessarily always the right approach, and everybody's teaching style is different, right? But that is one approach. Whereas this other instructor with the debate activity, his approach was more concentrated, where he wanted to first test out the tool by bringing it into just one activity to begin with. And I wanted to point this out because I think there are a lot of approaches instructors can take. There's not necessarily one single right approach. For many people, they may feel uncomfortable trying to change their entire course in one fell swoop, right? And that's totally understandable. And so you can start out with a smaller, just one in-class activity as you're testing the waters, you're identifying a good place for bringing in the AI. You can also take this approach of this instructor where he scaffolded it, where he had multiple activities throughout the quarter, all building up to more higher order uses of Papyrus AI. So those are the things that I wanted to highlight. One final thing I want to mention is along the lines of what Tamara was talking about with regard to working with the students. In each of these cases, in each of these activities, the students and how they responded to the activity was really important. A lot of them in our cases, they had experience with generative AI already prior to these activities, during, after, whatever. They've been using it in their own use. And their responses, their feedback was really critical in refining each of these activities to be more effective, to meet those student learning objectives that the instructors wanted. And that collaboration with the students and transparency is really helpful. These students have a lot of experience with AI, and they've mentioned to me directly in interviews that they appreciate when their professors are very clear about their policies and they open discussion about AI usage because they feel, especially at the moment, they don't necessarily get that conversation in any of their classes. They may be told that they're allowed to or not use it, but they might not have a conversation about why that is or the limitations. And so that was just a few things I wanted to mention about these activities. There's a lot of different approaches you could take, but these things are always centered on, what you're observing in the classroom, the things that you want to accomplish with the student learning objectives, centering those, and with iteration and reflection, refining them to get better, as you do with most assignments.